This is Top of Mind, the Dr. Patrick Slowinski Show.
All right. Well, welcome everybody to another edition of Top of Mind. I'm Dr. Patrick Slowinski, your host. We have with us today John Sitilides, who is a well-known consultant, a national security advisor, national affairs, international affairs, Columbia grad, works all over Washington trying to help people in government get it right. And I think one of the things people may recognize from him is that he is a national security senior fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute. So that's a great honor to have you here, John. You've also done work in my beloved former State Department in the Foreign Service Institute, also known as the National Foreign Affairs Training Center, which has a not the most pleasant sounding acronym sometimes, NFATSI. But the National Foreign Affairs Training Center, you've done over 17 years working with the State Department on a variety of issues there as a consultant. So this guy knows a lot about foreign affairs. He has a master's degree from Columbia in international relations. And we're welcome to the program, John.
Well, Patrick, first of all, thank you so much for having me with you and to be able to share my insights with your distinguished audience. I'm looking forward to a great, robust, and very varied conversation with you on so many of the issues that are of great interest to you, to me, and again, to your audience. So thank you.
Thank you, John. One of the things that I wanted to talk about that's top of mind for many Americans is the record-breaking shutdown. So the government shutdown has exceeded the record now. I think it's 36 days. The previous record was 35. I could be off a digit or so. But I know that's not a record you want to break. Most people would prefer the government to be open. As a consultant, as you're out there looking at things, and you have some experience with government shutdowns, any kind of prognosticating on when this thing might end and what you're hearing from the business community of what are the implications of a really prolonged shutdown, which arguably we've already had?
Well, we hope we won't. I mean, we're kind of in unknown, uncharted territory right now, Patrick, right? So as you just correctly noted, we have a new record. We don't know how long this is going to last, and it looks like both sides are locked eyeball to eyeball. Both sides believing that the longer this goes on, the stronger their position will be, that they have a base in their political camp. And I don't know really if the Senate Democrats are going to be rethinking their position anytime soon, because that's really what's going to break the logjam, right? I mean, the president, I think, has been quite clear that we'll negotiate the issue of health benefits for illegal aliens or any other issue regarding Obamacare subsidies or reforming Obamacare or whatnot, but we can't do it in a period of hostage taking. But now that the elections are over, we've got a little bit of clarity in terms of obviously the governorships in New Jersey and Virginia. We have a Democratic socialist, some would say outright communist, who's a mayor in New York. And now that that's behind us, maybe there's a little bit of daylight inside the Democratic Senate caucus, that is, so that we can get a few more lawmakers to peel off and sign off on reopening the government, ending the shutdown, and getting back to, I don't want to say regular order because we're so far from regular order in terms of the way both the Senate and the House work, but at least getting back on track with delivering a fiscal year budget for 2026 for the American people, which really is job one for Republicans and Democrats in the House and the Senate.
Right. No, a continuous resolution, everyone throws CR around. But if you don't know, it's continuous resolution. That's basically how we've governed fiscally for a long time, and it's not the best policy, but it does provide you with some security for a year or so, and it gives you that wiggle room to negotiate some of these harder topics. So yes, I know that everyone wants this thing to be over. We're just getting to the point where you're really going to see the dangerous byproducts, if you will, of a prolonged shutdown. For the most part, the president and his team have been doing a great job of thinking outside the box to try to fund very important things such as military salaries and so forth. But that's running out. And so there's only so much that the president is allowed to spend. So they need to find a solution right away. I think everybody, regardless of their party, I would hope would want an end to the shutdown soon.
The
I actually
problem that
think
we
that
also have, Patrick, if I might, is
sure.
this thing has gotten so bad that we're looking at the end of a shutdown as a good thing in and of itself. And it really is the lesser of several evils. And
Mm,
even if we go back to a
that's true.
continuing resolution, remember the one that passed in the House back in mid-September? I think
The
it runs
cleaning.
through November 20th or November 21st. So even if they end the shutdown tomorrow, they're going to have to come up with a new continuing resolution that gives them more than what, less than 3 weeks now
That's
to
a
be able
very
to
valid
work out
point.
the next fiscal year budget. So you may have a CR that's supposed to go until Christmas or New Year or whatnot. And overall, it's just a terrible way to run the budget process. And what we need, as you correctly note, I think it's been maybe 12 to 14 years now since we had regular budgetary order where you have every authorization committee, every appropriations committee, 12 separate bills, put them in a package, give lawmakers the opportunity to debate, to amend, and the like. And instead, we get the proverbial Christmas tree every December that is stuffed with a lot of necessary expenditures and, frankly, a lot of garbage that lawmakers are able to sneak in. Nobody wants to vote against it because then they'll be primaried in the next election cycle for having voted against all the good things that people expect from the federal government. So it's just disastrous every which way, but at least we get out of the current abyss and
No,
go to
you're
the
right.
next bad level, a la Dante's Inferno almost, from a legislative and fiscal process.
No, I think you're right.
Mhm.
When I was a diplomat for over 2 decades, people would ask me about things that would just provide me the kicker gore fear and trembling moment where I would just like, oh, I don't know how I should answer that. And one of them was fiscal, how we do our fiscal budgetary issues,
Mhm.
which is a mess to explain to people. And then the second was the electoral college. But those
Mhm.
things are just hard for people to grasp. Also, the rule of cloture, and then 60 votes to break a filibuster. All of those things together. But I think the one question I think is fair that some of my non-American friends have been asking me, John, is why do you even allow your government to shut down? So that's our last question, and we'll move into international affairs. But I wanted to get your
Yeah.
thoughts of why have the founding fathers probably didn't think about this as a. I've read the Federalist Papers. I don't really see anything particular about that, but I'm wondering why do we even have this as an option?
That's a great question. And you're right. I mean, I probably need to review my civics and see what, if anything, was in the Federalist Papers, or frankly, when was the first so-called government shutdown, and what was the sort of legal and sort of constitutional argument for and against. But I think it's also important to note here, Patrick, that shutdown is really a bad word, right? The government is not shut down by any means. Yesterday, I was fortunate to take one of my four sons to the Supreme Court, and we attended oral argument there. The Supreme Court is functioning just fine. Our essential federal personnel, especially our military, first responders, air traffic controllers, TSA personnel, and whatnot, unfortunately, they're working without pay. Fortunately, they will all get back pay, but for those people who are earning modest salaries, they need that check to check cash to pay utilities, buy food, buy gas, pay the rent and the like. And so it's very, unfair to impose this kind of financial hardship on people who've done nothing to bring this about. It's happened because lawmakers who continue to be paid for the last month can come to agreement. So it's really a major slowdown of the federal bureaucracy, but I think shutdown is a little bit of a misnomer and probably
I think you're right.
exaggerates the impact of all of this non-activity.
Our language should be more precise and accurate, and
Hmm.
I agree. It is
Yeah.
more of a slowdown. And I'll
Hmm.
just say the final thoughts on this is that uh, you're in the consulting field, and I've been around after I retired from the foreign service, in the consulting in the contracting world. And contractors, if their contract hasn't expired yet, they're getting paid until they wouldn't, right? If they
Mm.
reach that spot where their contract is up for renegotiation and they're unable to do that, then they're not going to get paid. And I'm just saying that in terms of Northern Virginia, who elected a sweep of Democrats last night.
Hmm.
Um, Lots of contractors and federal employees here that tend to donate, at least about the last time I looked at data, about 93% of this area that we have in terms of political donations lean Democrat. That's
Hmm.
93% the last time we checked that data. And all of those people are here working and keeping Nova and parts of Maryland and DC running. So regardless of, like I said, regardless of one's political views, this slowdown, if you will, needs to end, and we need to get back to the people's business. So with that, on the people's business, the president's been very busy, despite the shutdown. He's been, welcomed, I think, genuinely in most of the places he went, including Asia, especially in Asia. Malaysia was the most interesting one for me. I happened to just catch the president of Malaysia talking about that he was actually convicted and put into prison. And then he turned over to President Trump and said, they almost got you too. And then there was just a moment of levity, but then it made me think, are we joking about this? Where have our politics gone across the world? And some countries are more nefarious for not really having how would I say, a very transparent rule of law. But man, we've got some issues at home. But ask you what I ask all of my international affairs and national security experts on the program is, how is the president's plan for peace through strength going? And what could he do better? What hasn't he not? What has he and his team maybe they could think about?
I think overall, the last 8, 9 months have been marked largely by successes in international affairs, at least I would say at the mid-level. And we'll talk about the strategic level, especially in the context of U.S.-China relations, right? Because that's really the relationship that forms the strategic axis around which almost all dimensions of international relations will revolve for years, if not decades to come. But the president is very proud of what he considers to be a successful record of, I think, 7 or 8 wars, maybe they're not outright wars, but conflicts or prolonged disputes that he's helped bring to an end or to resolve. And he keeps talking about the ninth one that gets away, and that's the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And I give him great credit for continuing to try to do so. I was on an interview earlier today with a European journalist who criticized the president for failing to achieve a peace between Russia and Ukraine. And I said, well, no one in Europe is lifting a finger to do this, right? At least he's giving it a shot, and he may not succeed. He may succeed, but if you don't try, right, you can't accomplish anything. So I think to a large degree, peace through strength. But I think we really haven't gotten there yet because, and Patrick, we'll need to talk about this in a little bit greater detail. Our military has tremendous will to achieve its ambitions, to achieve its objectives. But frankly, it's a hollowed out military in so many ways. And so the capacity is lacking. And I think Secretary Hegseth is doing his best to try to rebuild capacity so they can achieve the lethality they believe they need to actually carry out peace through strength. Because if you don't have lethality, you don't really have strength, at least from, a kinetic or military perspective. But peace through strength, I think let's transmogrify that, as they used to say in Calvin and Hobbes, to economic prosperity through commercial strength. And I think that's pretty much at least to date. And we'll see what happens with the Supreme Court ruling on the IEEPA national emergency powers that President Trump has assigned himself here. But President Trump has certainly leveraged every country's overwhelming wish to access the vast and wealthy American consumer market to either tear down non-tariff barriers, to recalibrate trade with important trading partners like China, like the European Union, very important countries and global supply chains and the like. But he's very much leveraged our very, very great power economically and commercially in ways that no other president has done probably in the last century. So I think on that front, yes, it's been very uncertain. It's been very disruptive. A number of American companies and industries are quite concerned about where this is taking us. But to date, it seems, especially with, I think, $200 billion to date in additional revenue generated for the federal coffers. Again, it depends if the Supreme Court nullifies this. But if they uphold it and President Trump can continue, I think you'll see economic prosperity through commercial strength as a hallmark of the next 3 years, and then we'll see to what extent actual Pall Mill, peace through strength, can be carried out, hopefully in deterring wars and succeeding as we did, say, with the strike against Iran's nuclear weapons facilities back in June.
Right. And I think the converse is also true. What happens if Pandora's box is open and they rule against the president's policies and authority in this issue? With all of that money you've taught, the monies, I guess that's the correct term, that are in the coffers at this time, what happens to that? Do we pay that back? And, there's a lot of consequences for this. I was actually less sanguine today listening to some of the justices' questions. It's kind of fun. You were at the Supreme Court, listening. It's kind of interesting to see, to listen to, because for me, I was just listening. I couldn't see any facial expressions or anything. I don't know. I think one justice in particular of the female persuasion questions concerned me. And I'm a little bit concerned about that.
I think you and I may have read the same reports. I wasn't there for today's, Patrick. I
Oh,
was
okay.
there
I
for
apologize.
two esoteric, sort of less impactful, meaningful, of course, to the plaintiffs and
Of course.
defendants. But I was there yesterday. But yeah, I think we read about Justice Neil Gorsuch and Amy Coney Barrett, who were asking more probing questions. But again, this is a lot of tea leaf reading. Let's see what happens. We have no idea. We're not even sure if we're going to get a single or simple majority, I should say. We might get split decisions. We might get a 5-4, and the 5 may be 3 of one persuasion and 2 of another that lean in one direction, but can be interpreted differently by the Department of Justice and the White House itself. So we have no idea whether we'll even have clarity, depending on what the Supreme Court generates. But it's going to take, I think, at least several weeks, we understand, possibly even early 2026. So for now, I think President Trump will continue with his tariff strategy just as he had for the last, well, I guess since Liberation Day, 7 months ago.
And you're more qualified, I think, to delve into the question on judiciary oversight and overreach. Would it be possible as a remedy in this case, the Supreme Court, to say that whatever was collected before does not have to be repaid? Could they put that kind of specific limitation on it?
Something tells me they can't, that all they can do is rule on the constitutionality of the action. And if the effect of their ruling is to nullify it, I presume there would be legal claims made on the U.S. government for restitution.
Oh, I
But
mean, in WTO and everything else. Yeah,
I
100%.
don't believe the court would be able to provide a specific financial remedy to this. That would have to be worked out between the executive branch and then all of these plaintiffs
Well,
or
it's
companies
interesting.
seeking restitution.
They were asking Scott Besson that question, and he said the president and us and his financial guys and gals, we have a lot of tools in our toolbox to talk to our partners. And so what I kind of understood that to mean was, if you're going to ask for your money back, there's an additional, that's, there may be some consequences for that. So
yeah, and there are other tools that they can come up with that don't involve quote unquote declarations of national emergency. That's really what this comes down to.
yeah.
And I think one of the interesting things here, it kind of goes back and forth, because when we had the Chinese Communist Party just a couple of weeks ago, Patrick, declare severe restrictions on rare earth exports that are utterly essential to the U.S. technologically based economy, that one could credibly claim is exactly the kind of national emergency that the president was citing in exercising these powers. But then when he punished Canada with an additional tariff because the governor of Ottawa, I think it was, put a video, an ad on American television, that seems a little personal and really sort of exceeds the national emergency threshold. And so I don't know if the president, for 2 weeks had his hand strengthened by Beijing's actions and then his hand weakened by his own response to the governor of Ottawa.
Yeah, it's interesting. Tariffs, often I think are incorrectly defined as a tax. Well, they kind of are a tax. They really are but are they really? And so I did a little over a year as a trade negotiator for in the USTR under
Mm,
President Obama. A lot of people don't know that as diplomats, we do all sorts of different things. And so I was over Central Asia and South Asia doing trade negotiations all the time. And tariffs came up even then. No president has actually done what President Trump has tried to do
hmm
to use it as a negotiation tool. Now, people are saying it's only a stick and there's no carrot involved. I don't believe that. I think him going out and striking all sorts of deals and sending his teams out, there are a lot of carrots out there we just don't know about.
There's also the greatest carrot of all. These
Our
countries can
market,
continue to access the American consumer market.
100%, which is probably what, if you count all the people who are here, and I don't know if we have an exact number on that, it's got to be over 340 million people.
hmm
That's a big market.
Right. With one of the highest per capita GDPs on planet Earth, right? I mean, I think the average per capita GDP in Mississippi is higher than that of the United Kingdom. So it gives you a sense of just how much access there is to be had here if the president permits you in exchange for recalibrating, again, either direct tariffs or non-tariff barriers that are deliberately meant to keep American exports out of those markets around the world.
You mentioned a little bit about China already, and I want to dig
hmm
a little bit deeper with you on that.
hmm
Um, depending on which reports you read these days and who you believe, and if you can figure out what their axe to grind is or what their angle is correctly, whether you believe all the reports. But I've read a lot on China, and it varies from depending on whom I read to they're imploding. It's all over. This is Potemkin's village. They're just faking that things are fine. It's awful. To they're not really doing that bad, and they're actually doing really well. And we're the ones who are deceived. And so, where are we really with a correct analysis, if you will, of where China is economically and in the trade sector and their dominance in the trade sector?
Look, it's not a secret that China has become an industrial colossus on the world stage. And a lot of that, looking back, really can be laid at the feet of American politicians, Republicans and Democrats, starting with the Clinton administration, right in the glow of the end of the Cold War and the sense of quote unquote the end of history. And every country was basically on the march towards some type of free market, liberal capitalist system like we enjoyed in the US that led to our prevailing over the Soviet Union. So I think we got a little bit too high in our own success. And we thought that since China was going to be reascending, and I want to emphasize this, Patrick, sometimes I think we're a little bit too ahistorical here in the US. And certainly your colleagues in the State Department over the years who are China hands know very well that for almost 2,000 years, China was the largest economy in the world until the mid 19th century when they encountered the British Empire and then Imperial Japan. And it was what I think Xi Jinping today calls the century-long humiliation. But they were always going to reascend to become a great economic power. But I think the strategic foolishness on the part of Americans, again, in retrospect, I want to be fair here, because most of us had hoped that China would become a quote unquote responsible stakeholder in the US-led international trading system. And I think we completely misunderstood the determination of I wouldn't call them communists, it's more of a Leninist party, the Communist Party in power, but they're really more Leninist and Marxist, to maintain absolute grip, absolute power over every lever of government, economy, military, society, education, and the like within the People's Republic of China. So it started under President Clinton, it was codified under President Bush 41, and China took up this astonishing economic growth rate at some point, double digits in the early aughts, and now stabilizing at a mere 4 to 5%, while we're struggling to get to 3% here in the US. So, no, China is an industrial and economic colossus in its own right. But whether some of the internal problems may lead to a collapse, I just think in many ways forecasting can be a very dangerous and a very foolhardy business. And you have a number of prognosticators that for 15, 20 years have been telling us that China's collapse is around the corner. And you would think at some point, humility would overtake hubris. But That's the forecasting business, I presume. I take China very seriously every day of the year, and I work on the assumption that we're going to be dealing with China as the so-called pacing threat economically, militarily, diplomatically, and technologically for years, if not decades to come. And I will be the happiest person in the world if tomorrow the Chinese Communist Party collapses, as did the Communist Party of the Soviet Union Christmas 1991, I believe it was. But I'm not betting on that. And so I'm going to be dealing with China very seriously as a very serious competitor and determined to overtake the US as a world power by 2049 because they say so publicly.
Yeah.
I take leaders at their word, and they've said so publicly. China will become a world-class power in 2049, and they believe the US is leading the West in long-term decline, and the rest of the world is on the ascent to be led by communist China. They say so openly.
No, I see that. And I
Mhm.
think dangerous flirtations with communism and socialism, that always gets me a little nervous. My family's from Poland. I know yours is from Greece. You speak Greek. I speak Polish. So we have strong diaspora roots. And when I was a younger lad living in Poland, right at the end of communism in Poland, in the beginning of democracy in Poland, man, I can tell you, um, even at the very end of it, you didn't want to live in that. And I did. And I
Mhm.
struggled just to get normal things, even though I had money. Things were not easy. Everything was extremely difficult. And I don't know if our good friends in New York City uh, really should be flirting too much with these ideologies that they don't really understand, especially the younger folks who, that's another thing as an academician and an educator.
Hmm.
I can't believe how poorly we have not taught our younger people about the Soviet Union, about communism, about all of the threats. They don't understand it. They don't know what it is.
If
So
I
I
might
want you to
offer
give us a
this,
couple thoughts on that.
well, yes, very much so. Poland unfortunately suffered under decades of horrific communist rule from the mid 1940s until the end of the Cold War, I think 1989, 1990.
Yes.
But most people have no idea that Greece was actually the battlefield for the first kinetic front of the Cold War in the late 1940s. And it was Joseph Stalin that wanted warm water access for the Soviet Union into the Aegean Sea by capturing northern Greece, if not the entire country. And so there were actually two civil wars inside of Greece between the communists and the royalists in the early 40s. And then after the end of the war, they resumed their civil war against the government in the late 1940s. And that's where the Truman Doctrine was born and the
Yeah.
Marshall Plan to rebuild countries like Greece and Turkey, Greece that had been utterly ravaged, first by the Nazi occupation and then by the communist civil war. Turkey, because it was a complete economic backwater country in the 1940s, but those two countries together, and this is where we get into a little bit of geopolitics, right? When we talk about not the complexity of international relations, as the term is often misunderstood, Patrick, but literally the impact of geography and of physical and natural features on political decisions. Greece and Turkey together bottled up the Soviet Navy and the Soviet Air Force in the Black Sea, so it could not access the Aegean Sea, the Mediterranean Sea, and then transit to the Atlantic through Southern Europe. So this is why the NATO alliance was so important in expanding in the early 1950s to include Greece and Turkey. But again, to my earlier point, the first actual battles between East and West in the Cold War were fought in Greece in the late 1940s. So my own family knows very well the hardship that the communists would impose on people. The only way communism is ever imposed anywhere is by sheer force, violent
Yeah.
force. The people never want it. And I hope that the people of New York don't reach a threshold, don't ever have to look into the abyss and find out what actual communism can do to an otherwise prosperous and thriving peoples. It's a very, very puzzling development in New York, to say the least.
It is. If one is taking the glass half full approach, this could be one of those tough life lessons for people to learn. I'm just not so sure because of the lack of education. When I talk to Gen Zers, they have no idea about what communism and socialism really is. They have no idea what Antifa really stands for and how they would gain their objectives and achieve their objectives through violence, right? They don't understand any of that, and they don't know what's ahead for them. I have a good friend of mine who's Albanian. He's an American citizen, but he grew up Albanian. And he just laughed on the phone the other night. He goes, "These people have no idea what's coming." And this is, in your neighborhood, Albania, with who really suffered from communism, which people don't even know about. They don't know what happened to that poor people in Albania of how they were ravaged by communism. So I hope that people wake up quickly in the United States.
I hope so also. There seems to have been a deliberate whitewashing of the evils of communism in the West, a whitewashing in the West of the evils of communism worldwide, all during the Cold War, but especially since the end of the Cold War. And, we recognize instantly the pure evil that is Nazism and the embodiment of evil that is Adolf Hitler. But we have young people that wear T-shirts with Mao Zedong and Che Guevara and really have no concept of the kinds of inhumane, animalistic evils perpetrated by communist overlords over their subjects over the last 80 years, 90 years, 100 years plus, if we go back to the founding of the Soviet Union. It really is a disgrace in terms of our public education system, Patrick, that our young people, who then go on to become our leaders politically, economically, financially, and civics, know so little about this enormously destructive ideology called communism.
Well, and another thing is the lack of a classical education. You can have a really rich classical education without indoctrinating people in particular politics.
Right.
I think St. John's is one of the few that still does it, that I know of. But there's so few of them that actually teach the classics, that teach Latin, that teach Greek, that teach. I learned Latin as a kid, Roman Catholic growing up. I know you're Orthodox. You don't have much of an option. And at my age, and I'm so glad I learned Latin, because to this day, I know the roots of many English words because of it.
Right.
And in Greek, of course, if a nod to my big fat Greek wedding, which has a lot of
I had
truth
a feeling
in it.
You were going there.
So many roots, that it's such a great movie. And I actually connected with the cultural aspects, being very Polish people are very close knitted in their families too. That's why Poland has done so well, is because they've stayed together through horrible tragedy.
Right.
And the Greeks as well. So with that, I wanted to turn to one other topic of mine that's close to my heart, is the educational system in the United States. We've already talked about a few things that they need to get right, bring the classics back, bring things back. I think tenure is one of the most evil things out there. It could be a great thing for professors, but it's not anymore. It's been abused. It's been a way for these really dangerous policies and theologies and ideologies to get into the educational system, and then create these young people who have these horrible ideas and they don't understand what they do. I remember the joke growing up when I was getting my first PhD years ago. And that was, Patrick, what's the difference between a professor with tenure and a terrorist? And I thought, oh, that's a horrible joke. You can negotiate with the terrorist, right? And that's a scary punchline. But I'm at a university right now where, as an adjunct, where we do not allow tenure for that reason. People need to stay there on their merits, and they can leave if they're going to introduce things that are against the mission of that university. Of course, it's a private religious university, but tenure has been dangerous. Having tenure the last 100 years at our greatest universities has created a cadre of socialist, communist, nihilist activists, in my mind. Not all of them, of course. There are some wonderful scholars out there that are objective, and they keep politics out of it, and they teach what they're supposed to teach. But a lot of them are not doing it. So I wanted to get your thoughts on, is there even a way now with the commercialization of education to even claw back the traditions that were so revered in the past, and they're not anymore?
Patrick, I like to remind myself that I know what I know and I know what I don't know. And I really do not know academia very well.
That's a good thing.
I will say one thing though, as it pertains to tenure, and this is just me, a private citizen on the outside looking in, but with four sons that have either graduated college or my youngest one is still in college. We all want the very best for our sons and daughters, for the young people of America, whether they choose to go to college or to go into the trades or go into a vocation or whatever they do, right? Anything that brings honesty and integrity to whatever work one does. But when we're talking specifically about college, I think tenure may have been a wonderful concept years and decades ago when there was a shared professional sense of adherence to promoting, like sort of like you referenced now, so the classical ideals, right? So that a college education wasn't simply a linear path to a particular career, but it taught young people how to think, not what to think, but how to
How
think,
to think.
and how to use education to attain higher understandings of beauty and truth and goodness and justice, right? As opposed to ideologically riveted education today, and sort of uniformly from one side of the political spectrum. If you at least had a diversity of opinions, right, like true diversity, right, diversity of thought, then I think you could say something for maintaining tenure. But it seems to me that the larger direction of university training of our young men and women has become so skewed and so distorted since really the 1960s that, like anything else, if it doesn't work anymore, then try to find ways to fix it, to reform it. And maybe that's where tenure is no longer the ideal that it was 100 years ago.
Well, and the only thing I can think of is I think a lot of them are well-meaning and they believe that their calling extends beyond the Hippocratic Oath. I often told people that professors should have the same Hippocratic Oath. Do no harm. Do not introduce your personal opinion into
Mm.
teaching. But they do it
Well,
anyway because they think that by not telling people which ideology that young people they should follow, that they are doing harm by omitting the information. But they're really often they're activists in sheep's clothing. And I wish professors were not that way. And clearly,
right.
I know tons of them that are not.
Hmm.
But I've
Of
met
course.
enough in my own experience, especially on the East Coast schools, that they do have a platform and kind of a free pass with that tenure to kind of just have carte blanche, if you will, to say what they want with very few repercussions and the impact they have on our young people. People were surprised to see all these young people just going out and saying very anti-Semitic things. I was not shocked at all because I've heard that out of the mouth of professors from tenure from the
Hmm.
East Coast and from the West Coast and from
Yeah.
certain schools in particular. But I digress a little bit. John, it's been amazing just talking to you about a whole bunch of things that are things we'd like to see fixed in our country. But I still get up every day and I'm grateful when I say my prayers and I read my Bible that
Hmm.
I live in the country I live. Is it perfect? No. Was it ever perfect? No. It's still an experiment from our founding fathers that we're trying to get right. And I wouldn't trade it for anything else. It's hard right now. So I wanted to get your closing thoughts on, where you see our country in the next few years and what steps need to be taken to keep the principles the founding fathers wanted us to keep.
It's probably not the most original thought here, Patrick, but people that I have come to respect greatly personally and professionally and are older than I am and wiser than I am have reminded me that it's never smart to bet against America, right? Simply put, we're going to go through tremendous challenges, but again, if we take an ahistorical approach and a very narcissistic one, we can focus on all of our warts, all of our problems, and we can despair about the future. But if we look at a country that, first of all, began by defeating the greatest empire on planet Earth in the late 1800s, survived a horrific civil war where brother killed brother, 600,000 dead Americans on American soil, and then survived the Great Depression, two world wars. We've been through cataclysmic episodes domestically and internationally for the last 60, 70 years. We almost had the dissolution of the NATO alliance in the 1980s. We had President Nixon taking us to DEFCON 4 during the Yom Kippur War in 1973. We had the Great Recession 15, 17 years ago. Our country has been rocked from so many different directions, from beneath, from above, from external and internal threats. And yet here we are today, at least from a material perspective, wealthier than ever, right? There's never been a better time from a material perspective to be alive as an American. Spiritually, there's a lot that can be fixed. There's no doubt about it. We're probably a broken country in many ways. But materially, we're as powerful as ever with all of the problems that we have in our military. And maybe if we have a follow-on conversation, Patrick, we can dig a little bit more deeply there. We still have the most powerful military in the world that gives us the free and open trading system to be able to trade with countries around the world and to afford that privilege free of charge to every other country, ally and foe around the world, thanks to the US Navy. So we're economically dominant, we're militarily dominant, we remain technologically dominant, especially in the field of AI, which is going to shape the future of quantum computing and robotics and so many of the frontier technologies that we see in the years and decades to come. And we're also energy dominant. So we're able to withstand many of these geopolitical shocks to our economy, to diplomacy and whatnot, because we're not dependent on the Middle East or other external sources for our energy that we need to feed our country and to power our economy. So, yes, do we have problems? Of course we do. We're all fallen men and women, very, very imperfect. But as you correctly noted, we strive towards perfection without ever achieving it, but we remain the greatest country on the face of the earth today, and I'm very confident for many years and decades to come.
John, fantastic way to finish up the show. I will take you up on the offer to come back. I really have been thinking a lot about the Roman Catholic for personal reasons and the Eastern Orthodox Renaissance that I'm seeing in many different countries, and get your take on that, as well as so many other things. To our audience members, it's been a great conversation with my new friend, John Sitilides, the Greek American and just a great overall thinker, loves erudition, and not necessarily an academician himself, but definitely knows a lot, particularly about international affairs. John, you're welcome on the program anytime. You've provided a great conversation this evening.
Let's do it soon, Patrick. Thank you so much. And thank you again for having me and allowing me to share some of my perspectives and insights with your distinguished audience. I very much appreciate it. Thank you.
In a world full of noise, clarity is power. Stay informed, stay aware, stay top of mind.